So we'll go back to our question. What is the difference between a table-driven report and a stored procedure-driven report? So here we'll look at an example of the two concepts within the same report. Here's the standard job list. This is the dashboard report that's behind this job list detail. It shows up here that hopefully everyone's familiar with. So if we click on this icon down here, if you click View and Toolbars and make sure your supplemental toolbar is checked, you can see this icon tray at the bottom of the screen. We click that icon and we get basically a visual on the tables that are put into this report. So the database has basically a series of tables. For example, there's a job table that will include the job number, a job name, concepts like project manager, superintendent, that kind of thing.
So is this like Access? Like these are relationships?
It's very similar to Access. It's probably a lot stronger tool. I mean, it definitely is a lot stronger tool than Access. Okay, but it's basically our database engine. It's done by Sybase iAnywhere, and it's got the best benchmarks in the PC market. And as far as the SQL database engine is concerned, according to the statistics that they put out, you'd have to spend $20,000 on the database engine or in that price range to get something that's more powerful or more, that's quicker, better capacity, that kind of thing. Overall better. So it's really a superior product. It's nice. So you'll notice that in a lot of cases we'll pull together a massive amount of information in very short order. So new users usually don't see that because they don't have a lot of data in their system, but later on you'll have a lot of data and you'll be surprised at how quick the system can be. If a report is not fast, there are different reasons it won't come up very quickly, and one might be that it's filtering a date range over a massive amount of data. Sometimes that can take a little bit of time. If the report is slow, generally it's because it's not designed very well. So some of the reports over time have gone from being slow to very fast because we've put effort into making it faster. There are relationships in the tables. For example, this project manager column in the JC job table has a tie to this UT names table. And we've actually pulled this UT names table in a few times and we've given the table an alias. Project manager is tied to that table, and the name you would retrieve from that sub-table. So the name's not actually placed on the job list. So if you change the name, for example, the reason for that is if you come over here to list management and you go to the project coordinator or project manager, these are our leader A and leader B fields, and I'll correlate that to the preferences. So under utilities, preferences, and job costs, we have leader A titles. See how it's labeled project coordinator. In your databases, a lot of times it's labeled project manager, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But you can label it whatever you want to. If I change it here, it changes everywhere in the system. It refers to the data. Okay, so back over to Crystal Reports. So I wanted to illustrate the concept. So if I take this project manager and I say, maybe I just want to change it to Bill. Now it's going to be Bill everywhere in the system. So if I come over here to job list, and I click on my project coordinators, I would see Bill. So, and by doing the identifier tying to a centralized location in a particular table and changing that name, every job that shows Bill as the project coordinator will now say Bill. It doesn't go back to every job and rewrite a field. And that's the relational concept of the lists. And a lot of systems will have that concept. What distinguishes us in the marketplace for the most part is that our transaction structure is relational. That means we have a centralized transaction structure, a single transaction structure that will cover many tables actually, but it's not many tables under each module, like a modular-driven system will have. So that's an example of what the table system looks like. On a store procedure-driven report, we'll look at this report that's under the cost to date column. And you'll see, if we go to the same icon, the visual link table icon, visual linking expert icon, I guess, maybe, you'll see that it has just one table. And that one table basically will have lots of fields. And what this really is it's a combination of many tables where the data has been pulled together for the user, for the person who's generating the report. Now there's some advantages to store procedure-driven reports. And the main advantage is that you don't have to deal with the business logic. If you come back to this report, first of all, understanding how all the tables link together can be a little bit of a daunting task, and we have that documented, but it's still very time-consuming to pull it all together. The second concept is that if you do something wrong, for example, there are many budget items to a single job, and if for example, there's an option for this link, options, and if I say equals, what that tells the system is that there's only one budget item to each job, which is not true, and so the report will be inaccurate. So if you make very small mistakes can be devastating to the accuracy of your data. So probably the biggest advantage and the reason we've really moved to the store procedure concept within our system is because of accuracy of the reports. So if we come over here and we're going to put some advantages and disadvantages down. Let's document it up here. So the one-to-many relationship we talked about with respect to the job and the budget item is transparent in a store procedure report, where if you do the tables yourself, you'll have to know that. I think it's important to understand how the reports are pulled together so that when you do generate a report, you visualize what you're doing, and that provides for the ability to be successful. So the accuracy of the store procedure-driven report. Generally much easier to assure the business rules are performed within the store procedure, and thus knowledge of table links and one-to-one versus one-to-many relationships is transparent. The speed. Maybe I should say it's much more efficient to generate a report.
So are you saying that like these stored procedures, if you want to make like a modification, so just use the stored procedures and then make them minor modifications instead of creating your own table?
Well, exactly. Let's say you want to generate an aging, and let's say you need that aging to age every 7 days. That's a request that's come in periodically. You could take this aging, and it does have a variable where you can change the, basically, you could change it to 7 days versus 30. And you would not, in my opinion, you're probably not going to want to generate reports from scratch, and we'll cover how to do that. You're going to want to find something close and modify it. And so get what you want out of the report with something close to it. Do you follow me?
Yeah. Yep.
So you're going to find a report that's stored procedure driven. If you find a report that's table driven, it's probably dangerous ground for you to be in, because if you mess the report up, sometimes it's hard to get it to work right. Now, if you want to add tables, knowledge of the table system and knowledge of how data gets pulled from a database is somewhat required, and you're not going to always get in trouble with it, but you could easily get in trouble with it. So the stored procedure-driven reports are much cleaner and much easier to work with from a user's perspective. And so you don't need to have this vast knowledge of database. General knowledge of Crystal reports is all that's really needed to be successful, and that's what it's about, right? You want us to be successful. You don't want it to take you an overwhelming amount of time, and when you're done, you want to have results, not something that works sometimes and doesn't work other times. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so let's see, what are the other advantages? I would say the accuracy, the complexity, and the ease of use. So maybe we should do this. So, and then probably success is probably a big item there. Okay, so let's go back to our concepts. So what are some of the stored procedures that have been developed for developing reports? We should say that are available. So today I've been trying to improve this information. Well, no, not that. This information actually, because it's not been updated in a while. It's in the help screens, but we've added quite a few stored procedures. So there are generally two classes of reports, stored procedure libraries. We have an R class and we have a TGET class. The TGET class is an older class. It's something we've put together over a long period of time. The R class is something we started last year. The TGET class, or the R class reports, are job-to-date reports when at a summary level. It can be at a detail level, and they can be, they're generally just not date-driven, basically. Not, we should say it that way. Actually, some of the R class reports are. So job-to-date reports when at the summary level, generally not date ranged. Okay, and so when you don't date range something, it makes it a lot faster, so they're faster. So we avoid doing date ranges when retrieving data unless the data is at a transaction level. Okay, so it's the reason we started the new class was to really kind of do some of the store procedures we've done before, but try to make it very quick. The TGET class reports, they can be very quick, but they're generally going to be date ranged, for example, and not like this job status period report. You can have your costs and billings in very specific periods, and so it'll go out and get a lot of data, and it'll date range a lot of data. So it does come up slower, but you get flexibility. And from an accounting side, we're always interested in cutoffs, or a lot of times interested in cutoffs. Sometimes the project managers are interested in cutoffs, so the cutoffs are important. So let's kind of go through this. Before we do this, what I wanted to do is combine the concepts into columns. There's not too many of these, so. So there's some financial statement ones down here. Since they're not necessarily tied to the T class of reports. But here are some examples of the R class versus the T class. Obviously, we want to add more to this list. But from agings to bank reconciliations to reports driven from the bid item grid, this TGET bid item AR, that's going to generate an accounts receivable invoice, whether you've marked everything to bill and you just want to preview it, or you've actually posted it and you click on the AR history tab within, or icon within that grid, you're going to run the same report. So it'll do these, the TGET bid item AR, the TGET cost plus AR, and I'm just getting this list together, but SOVAR, those will print before and after. TGET Tran AR, that's more after the fact. That's more from the transaction dialogues. It's kind of job status units probably need to be in the job status area. Okay, so cost plus reports. Ledger reports. The ledger reports okay, so job commitments, we did a really nice couple of reports on the job commitments recently. I'll put those right next to that. It combines the job status and the job commitment concepts together. So job status reports, reports. Down here we have reports for generating like paychecks, that kind of thing, purchase orders, subcontracts, document transactions. Then there's a store procedure that generates income statement and balance sheet. That on mute. And so it gives you an idea of the extent to which some of that stuff's been put together.
So where are these stored procedures? Like, how will I find them?
That's a great question, actually. Okay, so we'll cover that. How do I access the stored procedures and or tables in my reports? In this Link Expert, you can click on Tables. Do this a little differently. Click on Tables, and you click Add Table, and then you have to go down to your connection for example, your ODBC connection. Most of the reports have been, over a long period of time, have been generated with an ODBC connection called Toolbox. And if you follow that concept, anytime you bring up an existing report, just set up an ODBC connection called Toolbox, point it to your default database, and the reports will just run automatically within Crystal. Otherwise, you have to tell it what database to look at, that kind of thing. So here it says Toolbox, and you see your tables, and there's a list of the tables in the system, kind of like Access. And if you go to Stored Procedure, here's a list of stored procedures. Now, the stored procedures in the system, if they start with SA, they're more of a system stored procedure, so there's a ton of stored procedures in this list. And you'll see that, we use stored procedures for a lot of different things. And there'll be quite a few, but you're going to want to go to either the R or tget alphabetical, in the alphabetical sequence. So if we go down to R underscore, so it's going to be right here. So here are the R class of reports. And tget class of reports will be after R, obviously. So tget, okay. So that's how you would pull them in. Tget job list, for example. What are some of the basic concepts in the Crystal Report Designer? So this is more of an introduction concept. How do we get around? What are some of the concepts with pulling data in? The default ODBC driver for the reports is the Toolbox ODBC driver. All the custom reports in the system have a default ODBC driver called Toolbox. So you set up an additional ODBC driver on your computer, and you can do a support call to do that. So the computer that you're going to generate your reports with, you would want to go into your ODBC. If you do a support call, that someone will help you with this. Like here's an ODBC, and I'll typically go to the system DSN. The user DSN works as well. This one has Toolbox in the user DSN tab. But I'll set it up, and there are instructions on how to set this up. And I'll point it to my default database. Usually on a multi-user system, your database is going to be on this line. This is a single user because we're dealing with the demo. when you set up your ODBC successfully, you would test it, and it's going to be labeled Toolbox, and then that will facilitate you modifying existing reports to coincide with what you need done. So another concept.
Before I can modify anything?
No, you can modify them with your existing ODBC driver. It's just going to ask you what database to look at, and you have to map to it to set it. So it's a little more complicated. It's going to be automatic if you set up that default ODBC driver. So just do a support call in and say, hey, I want a default ODBC driver for called Toolbox, so that I can work with Crystal reports a little easier. An issue you may run into when running reports from within Crystal outside of TimeSuite is that Crystal may not always recognize parameter defaults. So one thing to watch out for when you're generating reports, the result is that no data will come up in your report. So for example, here's a job list. Okay, and if I just hit the lightning bolt and I say, okay, I'm going to go with all the default parameters and click OK, this time the data came in, but it doesn't always do that. In fact, I think if I close the report, because I've actually set it in here before, if I open the report, I go File, Open. Now, for most users, you're going to go to a T drive and Reports, and you'll see all the existing reports that we have, okay, that you can filter through and bring in. I'm working with a local drive, so I'm going to just go to my C drive, and then Reports, C Toolbox Reports, and I'm going to go to Job List. There's the job list report. If I hit the lightning bolt and OK, well, it did bring everything in, so it's not working with me. But I actually did this on a customer's computer earlier this morning, and it didn't bring everything in. So what I had to do is hit the lightning bolt and make sure I address every parameter. That's I guess it's somewhat of an issue with the report, with Crystal reports. But as long as you address every parameter, if there's a date and it has a checkbox that says default, uncheck the default, and then click through it. So that's what it would look like if it didn't recognize the parameters. So just to give you a heads up on an issue when you work within the report designer, so you don't get frustrated, you expect it. To see your supplemental toolbar, tools icon tray, click View, Toolbars, click Supplemental Tools, and OK. So I'm going to move this over. And what we're talking about here is this supplemental toolbar down here. So I go click on Tools, or View actually. View Toolbars. And then I check that box. When you install Crystal, it comes like this without it turned on. So View, Toolbars, Supplemental Toolbar. Click OK. Click on the Link Expert icon to see a visual link of your dialogues. And that's what we're talking about here. Click on that, it shows you a visual link of to show your visual link expert dialog. Okay. Design tab versus Preview tab. So once we hit the lightning bolt, it threw us into the Design tab, or the Preview tab. Now if we click on the Design tab, this is what we looked at when we went into the report or opened it from the table system. When we hit the lightning bolt, it actually put us in the Design or the Preview tab. So you have a Design tab and a Preview tab. Okay. So also when you first come in, you won't see the Preview tab. So that's what we're talking about. So if I open up the report again, there is no Preview tab. It won't come up until I actually try to run the report. Okay. Refreshing your report against the database. database and verify report. What it's saying is tables will add columns to the tables periodically. Now, sometimes, especially like, let's say you have a report that you've modified that's a schedule of values, AIA equivalent type report, and we modify the stored procedure behind it. We've done that periodically, and what will happen is your report will all of a sudden not work. And so you do a support call, we'll open up the report, and we'll verify the report against the database. And what it'll do is it'll update the stored procedure that sits behind the report. And the reason it's prompting us for so many times is because there are so many sub-reports within this report. So if any report in the system can be put behind these sub-reports. So if I look at each of the blue numbers, there's going to be a sub-report behind every one of them. So if I'll illustrate. So if I go to that first tab, I brought up this report. And if I show you the table system, this is a table-driven report, and it's called Job Billing History by Bill Code. I go back to the Design tab and I double-click on this change order report. And this is actually just a completely different report that we pulled into this report as a sub-report. Now I go to the Visual Link Expert. You'll see it's done with the store procedure. And I go to this revised contract, and we get another table-driven report. Sometimes on very simple reports, it's very quick and easy just to do a table-driven report. 3 tables is not something that's going to get you in trouble. And it's going to be very quick. So efficiency, it's generally more efficient to write a report with a stored procedure, but not always. It's a lot more efficient to generate a complex report with a stored procedure. Simplified reports could go either way. Now if I go back over here and I click on this icon, it shows me the on-demand sub-report. So this report is actually this report. I come over here, this change order report, which threw us in here, come back to the preview tab and click on those change orders, brings up the report. Okay. So inserting a group. How do we insert a group? We click on Insert Group. So there's the keystroke sequence. We'll come over here. We'll say Insert. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. It has a different name so we don't modify it. So we're going to insert a group. We say Insert Group. We select the fields you want to group by. We're already grouping by job number in this report. But let's say we want to subtotal everything by the project manager. So we could go to this field here, ET names, project manager name, click OK, and now the report will come up and subtotal by the project manager. Now, it's by job and then by project manager, so maybe what we want to do is switch our groups around. So there's actually, we'll cover this again in another section, but we'll cover it here as well. We go to reports, we say change group expert, and we just move it, change the order of the groups. So now our primary group is going to be this project manager name, and the secondary group, which is there's a hidden column here, or a hidden group, is your sort by field, and in that sort by field is the job name. There's a variable, and we'll cover variables later. So now Bill's jobs are in this section, Jack's jobs are in this section, and Steve's jobs are in this section. So that's what a group is. Now as far as getting subtotals for each one of them, then once you do that, then you have to go in and you have to get subtotals, and we'll cover that in a little while. So what's the Field Explorer? And the keyboard sequence to get it up is Insert and then Field Object. And the Field Explorer is here, and we can bring up basically different types of fields. The database fields, if it's a table-driven report, you'll see all the tables. And if you expand further, you'll see all the columns in the tables. And if it's a formula field, you'll see all the formulas that we've created for this report. And then there's something called SQL expressions. We'll cover those later. And then there are parameter fields, and parameter fields are for filtering or filtering the report. Something called running total fields, and they're very appropriate at different times, and we'll show you how to do that. You have group field names that you can pull in. And special fields, such as page number, N of M, which is the preferred way of doing it, because it tells you how many pages you have from each page. Print date and time, we use that a lot. So that's an introduction to the Field Explorer. So the advantages of using stored procedures. I guess we've duplicated that, haven't we?
So I can use any of those Field Explorers and put them, I can grab something like the print date and print time and put that onto the report?
Exactly.
Oh, I just drag it? Okay.
Yep. And you'll see that we've done exactly that here.
Okay. And then you just highlight it and click delete?
Yep, that's exactly what I did. Disadvantages of using stored procedures: you can't use multiple stored procedures or tables tied to stored procedures. So one thing that would make you always want to use stored procedures is if you could tie a stored procedure to a table, like tables are tied to tables. You cannot do that. So it seems, you know, if you look at the tables versus the stored procedure, it seems like you get more flexibility with the tables. But the issues with table-driven reports are not worth pursuing table-driven reports in complex situations. Some of the reports we've generated, we've completely just redone because we'll have too many support calls on them. And if they're complex, I don't know that we have many complex reports left in the system that are table-driven. We'll get support calls on them. All of a sudden the report will lose, when you link them, they don't always maintain this concept of the left outer join, which means there can be a one-to-many relationship. So sometimes you'll lose that. Sometimes just for some reason, if you bring in just different things can happen to the report that causes them to be a little flaky. So the stored procedures are a lot better to go with, unless it's a simple report. So running total fields, let's talk about what those are, and in another sequence we'll actually cover it in depth, cover the concept in depth. So what a running total field is, and maybe we can get a report up here that might make some sense. I'm not sure we have any sub-reports in this report that, let me pull in another report. Okay, so here's a report that will allow us to illustrate the sub-report, the running total field concept. So you basically have in your project, you've got your job concepts, and then you'll have a one-to-many relationship with your bill code concepts, your budget concepts, and your bill code concepts. So within the system, we double-click on a job, and we have a budget. So we have many budget items to this one project. And then we have many schedule of value line items to the one project. Generally, you're going to have, not always, but you could have multiple budget items to each bill code. So for example, if we look at this O2 category on this project, we double click on it, and it's pointing to O2 demolition as the billing code. Okay. The billing codes are for revenue, so the revenue side of your transaction, and the cost codes are for the cost side of your transactions. And there's a tie, a logical tie between them. Some companies don't need that tie, and the tie becomes irrelevant. But if you do need the tie and you want to report across the concepts, then you can get yourself in trouble unless you use running totals. Okay, so if we come over here, here's a report that will show you the concept a little better. Actually, I selected the wrong report. So by bill code, we can get our costs. We double click on it and it gives us all of our detail. Okay. So we can have many cost codes to one bill code. So if we come back over here to the Crystal report, designer, we now can, this is a report that basically we have, actually that's not the one, we're going to go, this one. Okay, so this report has period billings, job to date billings. Okay, so it's got information for at the bill code level. However, we know there are more cost codes than bill codes, and there's many cost codes to one bill code, or a one-to-many relationship when we talk about billing codes to cost codes. Okay, so if we take and we put on our report a variable, let's say the billings. This one is, let's say contract amount. Okay, so we put the contract amount on this row, and we'll print the report. Okay, so there's our contract amount. Now double click on it and to get my detail. But if you look at this contract amount, it's a variable, and the variable basically is two fields, two separate fields coming in. It's the original contract plus the change orders. Okay, and if we were to sum that, if you look down here, you see the pound sign. And what the pound sign signifies in front of a variable is that it's a running total field. Okay. Now, if we look at the variables that start, the formula variables, like a formula variable on a report, and we'll have an @ sign, and you'll get familiar with that as we go. The parameters will have a question mark on them if you put them on your report. If I drag that onto the report and I look at it, see there, it's a little bit faint. Actually, if I do it this way, you see a little better. It's got a question mark in front of it. So if we take that and we say insert a subtotal, and that's the difference. Let's go, we'll just say at the, well, this is at the group footer, and this is the report footer level. We'll say we'll insert a grand total, which is simple, right? So we've inserted a grand total, and then, but we have this running total number. And if we look at the preview, it'll tell us, it'll show us the difference. I'll move this so we can see it. So we have $3.8 million versus $262,000. If we go to the job, it's $262 on that report. Come over here to this job. Go to the schedule of values, it's $262,000. And the reason it's showing it such a large number is because for every bill, for every cost code, there's a detail level in the report. The detail is here. So every budget item is going to come in at the detail level. And let me show. just turn that off. This is a copy, so it's not going to matter. So we have a detail level, and this contract amount is going to come, all the fields in the report come in at the detail level. So here we have that $30,000 on every detail row. And when I sum it, it's going to sum one time for every detail row. So if I were to add, if I insert a subtotal here at the bill code parent level, you'll see that by the time I'm done with my general requirements, I'm at $900,000 on a $30,000 line item. So that's why we can't just sum them. What we have to use is we have to use these running total fields. And if I edit that running total field, and it's called contract adjusted G1, contract adjusted. And there's a bunch of running total fields that we created that we just didn't delete. The report's been messed with some to change it around a little bit, looks like. So this is how you create a running total field. And this is just an introduction, and we'll go through it a little in more depth later, but just to get familiar with it. So what we've done is we've named it, and then we've set the field to summarize this contract adjusted amount. So we've come over here to our contract amount, adjusted, and we've clicked this icon to get it over here. And then we said evaluate it on the change of every bill code. So what it's going to do, in this section when we sum it, it's going to sum for every row. Here we're going to evaluate whenever the bill code changes, and that would be basically probably at this group level of 2. Okay, so group level 1 is going to be bill code level. Group level 2 is the budget level, and you'll see that you have several budget items coming in here. And actually underneath each budget item you have types. You have labor, material, sub, equipment, other. Now we're on alternatives, labor, material, sub, equipment, other. And then after you get all these cost codes lined that are all tied into the schedule of values, general requirements, and we're going to come in that way. So that gives you an idea of why we need to use running totals. And the reset is on the change of a group. So for every group we need to change and reset. Now there's also a contract adjusted grand total. So for every, if we hide the detail level again, so for every one of these group headers we've got to create a different variable. So it gets a little complicated or a little time consuming. Once you understand the concept, it's not hard. And at the overall total report level, we would never reset the variable. So it accumulates it, and then we place it on the report. So the running total fields is probably one of the more complicated things that you'll have to deal with in generating reports with stored procedures. So grouping for jobs, and probably not a lot of reports need running totals. So if that was daunting, it's not. You don't have to do it very often. And if you get in that situation where you need to do it, you can do a support call, and we'll help you, walk you through it. Okay. Okay. So grouping for job reports. If you want all three concepts in the job area: job billing, cost codes. Okay, so job billings, and cost codes. Then you should group in the following order to avoid totaling inconsistencies. So this is where we're coming in and we're saying, make sure your primary group is your job, and it is. This is at the job level, so we didn't have to do a group because it is basically just the job information is going to come into this report because we filtered all the other information. See that? We said only Boolean information for this job. So only information is going to come in on the job. And then the second concept is we need to basically make sure we organize our data by bill code. So if we come over here, we go to group 1, it says bill code parent, okay, which is essentially the bill code. And group 2 is the bill code itself. And then, so we've done it by bill code. All right, so we did it actually by bill code parent, then bill code, and then budget code is this detail level. And if we go to reports and sort records, we're not really sorting by the budget code underneath. We probably should. So if you drill down the budget codes, it's not assured that the budget codes will be in order. Okay. So that's a concept when you pull job reports together that have bill codes and budget codes. So let's talk about what a variable is. There are different types of variables. Okay. There are numeric variables, and they're like numbers. And there are alphanumeric variables. And alphanumeric can be numbers and letters or special characters. Okay. There are date variables. There are Boolean variables. And a Boolean variable is like a checkbox, a yes or a no, a 0 or a 1. Okay, a 0 is no, a 1 is yes. Or a check is yes and an uncheck is no. Actually, a check equals 1 and an uncheck equals 0. Numeric expression variable type, and that's a result of calculations of other columns. So you can do calculations on columns of like variables. Or, for example, if I want to combine an alphanumeric variable with a date, I can do that, but I have to convert the date to alphanumeric. If I want to create a variable that comes from the database like customer name, and then plus some numeric variable, like let's say we wanted to maybe billings for the year. I'm not sure why we'd want to create a variable that had these two in the same exact column, but we could. We just would have to change our billings, which would be a numeric variable, to a text variable. And you would call it, there's a toText function basically that you would call toText syntax that you would put in place. So it would convert this to into alphanumeric, so you could display them in the same field. And actually, there are several examples of that all throughout the system. And when we look at the on-demand subreport headers, those cannot be numeric variables. They have to be alphanumeric variables. So, for example, if we go back over to our job list and we look at this accounts receivable column, we're going to expect to see our accounts receivable balance there, right? And if we edit, if we change the format, we'll go through how to set these up later, but if we go to the subreport tab, there's an on-demand subreport caption that you set. And what we're saying is we want to display the amount of accounts receivable, this variable. But in order to do that, we have to change it to text. So that's where we're changing it to text. We'll cover some of those variables and that syntax for changing that later. So this is just an introduction of the different types of variables. Okay. In the .NET screens, throughout our system, in the various notebooks, you'll have a custom fields area or tab, and you can create an unlimited number of custom fields for numbers, dates, and text. So those three. In the .NET grids, you've got two additional types of variables, booleans and numeric expressions. So the .NET grids, they become more like Crystal reports. Okay. Although you're not going to do this, some of this stuff you're just not going to be able to get done in the .NET grids. So Crystal reports, serves a function. So setting landscape versus portrait on your report. Introduce that concept to you. So let's say I want to change it. I go to printer setup, and then there's an icon here. It can't be, I think I have to be in the designer tab to make that change. So printer setup, and it's marked no check, no printer, so I really didn't need to be there. So now if I change it, it'll do that kind of thing. So that's how you change it from landscape to, portrait to landscape, or landscape to portrait. So how do I look up the help screens? Or what do we want to do is we want to look up the help screen, the toText function. Okay. So if I go over here to the help screen in Crystal Reports, here's another issue they had with their install. So on the version that we're on, and hopefully we'll move to a newer version soon, their help screens just didn't come up if you're in there. So what we did to facilitate, you go to work around it, you click Help, and you click Release Notes, and you go down to Help Links. We changed this page around and somehow it got dropped off of there, so we'll have to put it back up there. There is a link to where you can, oh, here it is, Reapply TimeSuite Toolbox help files. That's our help files. There was one to reapply the Crystal Reports help files. You click on it, and you'll run it here. Here we're just applying updated help files. These are done as part of the year-end stuff too. So, but it'll place a Crystal Reports help icon on your desktop, and it looks like this. It's got a question mark, and you click on that from your desktop. If you don't see your desktop, and one thing that especially with the newer version of Windows, I go to Properties, Toolbars, and I check that, and then I get everything on my desktop right here. Okay. So if we come over here and we want to convert, we want to see all the options on the toText concept, toText function, double click on it, and it gives us all of our options. So X, Y, Z, and you might think, well, why do I need so many options? And we use them extensively. So the Z is a single character text string indicating the character to be used for the thousands separator, for example. Y is the whole number indicating the number of decimals. We use that quite a bit. And then X is the value, the currency, the variable that we want to display. So there's quite a few different things you can use the toText for. So if you're pulling in a date, you can actually specify the format of the date before it's turned into a text variable. So you can display it the way you want to display it. So looking up things in the help screens can be very helpful. It's a great resource, and Crystal Reports does a good job with their help screens. And if you need that, if you can't find that, it should be on your computers now, but if you can't find it, you can do a support call. So when we install Crystal Reports to the computer that you want to use it on, we'll typically unzip that help file as well to your desktop or help icon. So that's the help screen. What is one of your best resources for figuring out how to do something? And that's to review how an existing report's done it. Okay, so if you pull up, if you visualize, a report that you've seen that has something similar, pull it up in the Crystal Report Designer and see how it was done. You can do a support call as well. How do you get two sections to print in the same space? So you right-click on the left side of the screen and you click Underlie Following section. So if we come over here, so here we've got, if we right-click there and click Format section, you'll see that this details area here underline we want to print it in the same space as the section above it. So if they may have multiple phone numbers, for example, we put in the header we put the Social Security number and the name, that kind of thing. If we had multiple phone numbers, it would double space and put a second phone number there. Okay. So that's why we would want to underline the following section. So that section underlies this section. So they're printing, they actually print on the same row, even though they're not in the designer, they're not on the same row. That's just an introduction to the underlying concept. Okay, so those are the concepts we're going to cover for today. And then if you guys want to continue to do just the live session with me, that's great. And we'll keep marching down the concepts. And hopefully every week we'll get something added to the web page on Crystal Reports. And over time we'll get better and better at it.